Greetings, friends! I know I showed off green screen last time, but it's kind of hard to transport, so while I'm here, you get this pretty tapestry behind me. And if you're the Choice of Games crowd and you don't watch my other stuff, don't worry about it. Anyways, greetings interactive literature fans. Last month, I did a review of a recent Choose Your Own Adventure game by Choice of Games. This month, I'm going to do an older hosted games title, Life of a Wizard by Mike Walter. Life of a Wizard is a game taking place in a fantasy world. Classic stuff. Dragons, orcs, elves, magic, all that fun stuff. It is the first Choose Your Own Adventure novel by Mike Walter, who has made several other books that I have had the pleasure of enjoying, such as Life of a Mobster and the Lost Heir trilogy. Wizards. From the kindly old white-bearded casters wearing robes with stars and moons, to the battle-hardened war mage throwing fireballs at dragons. The royal family has always had one on hand. A wise diviner to lead the kingdom into peace, or a dangerous conjurer to dominate all the land under one rule. Or perhaps a divine healer, an alchemist, or even a necromancer. The combinations are boundless. Let me tell you my story. I wasn't always a wizened old wizard, you know. Wizards begin their lives same as everyone else. I was born in a small village in the kingdom of Daria. King Norbert and Queen Audrey reigned in the capital city of Tornassa, which was many miles away from my small village. So what do you do in Life of a Wizard? Pretty much what it says on the title. You play a powerful wizard from their youngest days until he or she retires at 80 years old. The format of the story is that it is being told to the reader by the protagonist themselves. It's got a very storyteller feel. The game's plot can be sectioned into 3 parts. First are your wizard's early days, where you get to choose your name, race, and backstory. Amusingly, you get a lot of choices for your race. Yeah, you can be a boring old human or elf or dwarf, but your wizard can be a gnome, a half-orc, or even a frickin' troll. And like in a lot of RPGs, choosing your race gets you certain benefits right off the bat. Play a human and people will generally treat you better, giving a bonus to diplomacy. Play a gnome, and you will have a natural affinity to illusion magic. Not to mention you get options for one race that you wouldn't get from another. The trip to Skåne was long and uneventful. On the way, we stopped in a little hamlet called Clearwater. It was a halfling settlement. I felt very comfortable among my own kind. The hamlet was filled with lush green pastures, gently rolling hills, and beautiful round doors. I convinced my party to stay for a few days. We enjoyed the wonderful food, and I loved the beds, chairs, and other furniture that fit me properly. I spent my days talking to people at eye level without always having to crane my neck to look up. It was peaceful. Everyone walked softly and spoke pleasantly. It reminded of what it was like to be a halfling. Then you go through your years in a beautiful small town, figuring out your childhood sweetheart and best friend and childhood bully, and you get to choose the races, genders, and names for all of them as well, before you leave for the academy. The next morning, I went to the academy. This was where all the great mages had learned their skills, including the royal advisor, Fraladin. The academy was financed by the Mage Guild, which was nice since it meant I didn't have to pay anything. I stood at the entrance to the academy, uncertain as to how to proceed. Here you get to really do some magic training, while still developing your mundane skills, which can help you cheat your tests. My alchemy class involved a lot of memorization. I had to know what each ingredient did, how they reacted to each other, and what kind of incantation would make each potion stable. It was a very difficult project that year. I stole the recipe from the teacher's desk. The potion was much easier to brew with the teacher's own recipe. I had to bite my tongue when the teacher said my potion was uninspired and lacked creativity, but at least I passed. And once you leave the academy, having either graduated or failed, you leave and enter part 2, where you put those skills to use by gathering an adventuring party and doing questing. You can probably tell that this game leans heavily into the classic role-playing game tropes. Sometimes it does play around with those tropes or approach them in a humorous manner. But in a lot of ways, your enjoyment of this book is probably going to depend on your opinions of classic fantasy. Anyways, you spend several years just living your life and telling various stories about your adventures. They're usually pretty short snippets, only taking a couple of pages and a few skill checks each. This means that you get a lot of different situations and a lot of skill checks and actions you can do. However, the format of the story does have some disadvantages. Because the story is being told as if it is being narrated to us, and it spans the entirety of a person's life, there isn't really a single cohesive narrative. It's more a collection of plots, some in the large scale, but most of them in a small scale. The story with the most narrative to it, since it spans the whole book, is about the King of Daria, which shows up from time to time in the early parts, but becomes more relevant in the third part of the story, when your character becomes the court wizard for the king. Your wizard gets to meet King Gareth and Princess Emily pretty early in the story, and you get the chance to romance them if that's your desire. Over the course of the story, you are on the sidelines as you witness King Gareth go slowly more nuts. I continued to hear terrible stories about King Gareth's reign. He had raised taxes every year since coming into power, but nobody knew where the money was going. Amanda, my girlfriend and traveling companion, heard that he was simply stockpiling it in his treasury for reasons that nobody knew. Public executions had become commonplace in the capital city, yet the dungeons were still overflowing with prisoners from everyone the king had imprisoned. Even the other nations around Daria were beginning to become leery of Daria's monarch. People had already started to call him the Mad King at this time. It was a name that would be on everyone's lips as the years went on. He gets paranoid, aggressive, and irrational, eventually convincing the princess to flee the country, only returning after Gareth finally gives birth to a son, providing an heir, thereby making any of her children not a threat to him. Now, if there is anything worth putting a spoiler warning in this story, it is this. Skip to this part if you want to get past that. At the end of your questing, you meet up with King Gareth and behold this. I entered the throne room and saw King Gareth sitting on his throne, reloading a crossbow. His hair was more silver than gray, but he was still in excellent physical shape. Prince Eric, his son, stood beside him with a panicked expression on his face. Prince Eric had grown into a handsome man at the age of 20, and he looked like his father. They were both staring across the room, where Prince Travis stood with the royal wizard Fraladin standing in front of him. Prince Travis was 29 years old, and looked like his grandfather, the late King Norbert. At his feet, I saw an unmoving bundle of rich clothing with a spreading pool of bright red blood beneath it. It was Prince Emily, dead by the Mad King's own hands. "This is madness!" Fraladin boomed, his gnarled oak staff gripped tightly in his hands. King Gareth was giggling as he continued to turn the windlass of his crossbow. Drool ran from the corner of his mouth, and his dark eyes looked slightly out of focus. "He must die! He'll have babies!" King Gareth said in a high-pitched voice. "Like a litter of rats, they'll come against me and try to take my throne." "No, uncle," Prince Travis said, his voice choked with emotion. "Gareth, you've killed Emily," Fraladin said in a low voice, trying to make the Mad King see what he had done. "Travis is your nephew. He loves you and supports you. Prince Eric is the rightful heir. There is no threat." "Kill him!" King Gareth demanded of me. It was an enormous decision, and I had no time to think about it. And now you are presented with a choice. Kill Travis, Emily's son, or kill Gareth. Regardless of what happens though, you still become court wizard and guide a king through their reign. So once that event happens and you become court wizard, you get one more goal, befitting the new position of power you have. Either bring peace to the world, or rule the world with your king as your proxy. Now you may have noticed I was pretty light on details through most of the story stuff, and that's mostly due to the style of telling a dozen small stories with the occasional big narratives. This extends to the characters as well. Characters like Gareth, Court Wizard Fraladin, and Archmage Lassius all have fleshed out characters, but you and your various entourage tend not to have easily identifiable character traits. On the one hand, this makes it very easy to roleplay, since your own mind can fill in details about why your wizard does what they do. On the other hand, it also means your companion characters are not really all that memorable. I will say though, there are lots of moments of good humor in this story. Nothing that will make you laugh out loud, but you'll get a few good chuckles in this. At the age of 7, I made a friend. Childhood friends are special, since they remain a part of you for the rest of your life, even after you've grown apart. My best friend was imaginary. I was a very lonely child. But now we get to the gameplay portion, and here's where I start having a lot of fun. And let's start with the most exciting thing, statistics. First thing you may note is that these stats are divided into 4 categories, each separated into its own page. The main page shows a few overall stats, your good and evil indicator, and your stat for body, personality, willpower, and fame. Next page we have our magic skills and knowledge. This is where the majority of your decisions will draw from. You have 9 different kinds of magic and 12 different kinds of knowledge. Each of these stats can be called upon for your decisions. The next page we have our friends, followers, and factions. It will show your familiar, your adventuring party, and their equipment level, and your standing with the different factions of the kingdom. And of course, you have your inventory, which keeps track of all your money and the stuff you have. Yeah, it's a little annoying that your most important stats are 2 clicks away instead of just 1, but that's small stuff. Second thing you may notice. This game is very transparent about what's going on when it comes to stats and skill checks. Every time you need to make a skill check, it will tell you what stat is being checked and what the stat needs in order to accomplish it. And if that particular stat isn't good enough, you will not be able to use that option. If you can't perform any of the stat checks, you'll have the option of failure. And of course, every time you make a decision, you will be told exactly what stats increased and decreased and by how much. The combination of these things makes it so that I don't feel like I have to check the stats all the time. And that is something that makes this game much easier to replay, since it really speeds up your decision making. You'll probably note this is a small commonality with my thoughts on Night Road. The gamer in me likes to have all the information in front of me, even if this might break immersion in the story. Something that I have noticed with this and other of Mr. Walter's other games is that he is very good at adding extra layers to the base gameplay. You get the basic gameplay in the first part of the story without any extra frills. When you get to part 2 and begin questing with an adventuring party, then you are given an extra mechanic, where you have to choose and outfit your party in order to improve their effectiveness. First, I used my skill as a weaponsmith to craft an excellent blade. Next, I cast a powerful transmutation spell upon the blade. At that point, it was already very powerful, but then I used my necromancy skills to bind several souls to the blade. It was truly epic, and Butch was very pleased. And your own party can be involved in your skill checks, helping you use options that wouldn't be available to you otherwise. We waited patiently for a few hours for our thief to return. It was just before dawn when Brianna came back, holding the diamond necklace triumphantly. And when you reach the end of part 2, when you reach the final quest, you will need to have your adventuring party at a certain combined strength in order to get the amazing rewards at the end of it. And then, that element of the game is dropped and replaced by a new mechanic during your court wizard phase of the game, where you have to use your knowledge and some of your skill checks in order to improve conditions in your kingdom in order to pull off your ultimate plan. I had a lot of work before me. I would need to strengthen every aspect of the kingdom, and then raise my relationships with the 3 guilds in order to strengthen my own position. When I was ready, I would have King Eric declare war on the other nations and conquer the entire land. And of course, there's so much you do in terms of roleplay. You can choose your race and magic skills, but you can also choose your friends and companions. You can get yourself a special mount, whether it be a horse or a freaking dragon, and you can choose a familiar from a wide variety of animals, from a dog, a cat, a snake, an owl, a floating skull, an imp, whatever you fancy. You can play an angelic goblin who trains to become an archbishop. You can play an evil elf who learns necromancy and becomes a lich. You can play a human who exercises a lot and fights with a sword if that's what you desire. The options available to you are as diverse as those in a tabletop RPG. And what's more, depending on the circumstances you choose, you can actually find hidden choices. Go for one of the specialist achievements and you will get options only available to those occupations. Some special choices will only show up if you are a certain race. Say, for example, when you go on a quest with the dwarves, you get options if you are a dwarf, and you get options if the dwarves have caused you grief as a child. It was a terrible tragedy, he said in a low rumble. The kingdom had been purchasing metal and weapons from us for hundreds of years. But that year, the kingdom didn't pay us. We sent diplomats to good King Norbert, but he claimed that he had paid us in full and eventually sent our diplomats away. We couldn't let such a thing go unanswered, or all our clients would refuse to pay. We had no choice but to attack. It was several years later that we learned that a group of gnomes had been using illusion magic to accept the payments on our behalf. We found those blaster runts and killed them to a man. I was so ashamed over the incident that I commissioned the mighty blade to be enchanted for the king, using the Forge of Wonder. And there is more! You can find options based on some of your decisions. Some options appeared based on what artifacts you have collected. Get married and birth or adopt a child, and some events will come up as a result of that. Play around and see which ones you can find. I had traveled the forest quite a bit when I was a nature guide, so I was able to spot several of the elves that were hidden. I could tell they respected my foresting skills as they came out of the trees and greeted us. After a few minutes of conversation, they escorted us into their city. And the endings available to you come at a great difficulty. If you strive for perfect endings, then not only do you have to succeed at multiple skill checks that require a few max stats, but you also have to manage the kingdom well and get a lot of accomplishments done to make your efforts strong enough to matter. And even with the difficulty, there are still many ways to approach the problems. And with the ease of seeing the stats throughout the game, you can enjoy this game as a puzzle as well as roleplay. In the end, while storytelling is not as amazing as it could be, the game aspects of this book make it very engaging to play and replay. It gives you a lot of freedom within the bounds of its events, and allows you a lot of opportunities to be a badass wizard. I opened the gates of hell, and brought forth hordes of demons. The citizens of Daria were held in awe as monsters of every size assembled on the battlefield to await their orders. And that is what I have to say about Life of a Wizard. I hope this review makes you consider it. If you want it, or if you want other hosted games, then many of them are available on Steam, the Amazon Store, the App Store, and Google Play. Take care, friends. Anyways, greetings interactive literature fans! Last month I did a review of an old... Nope, that's not right. Jesus, why am I having a hard time with this one? And of course, every time you make a decision... Squeaky doors! And that is what I have to say about Life of a Wizard. Okay, here we go.